I've updated a few of the slides in terms of our carbon footprint in Carlyle, and I think it's pretty interesting because, to the best of my knowledge, no one's ever tried to look at the community-wide carbon footprint. And there's still lots of uncertainties, and I still love to have someone review some of what I've been doing. But more importantly, understandably, there was a lot of feedback on the one slide we had. We just kind of hit people over the head with this, oh yeah, and by the way, we have to hire the sustainability director, and then they're going to cost X amount of dollars, and blah, blah, blah. So we meaning Debbie and me, tried to come up with some alternative ways of managing this whole thing, and I want to present some of that today and get folks' feedback on this. And again, as I said last time, I think what I hope the way people will look at this is this idea of setting goals and potentially putting resources aside to pursue those goals is not about this task force, not about the energy task force. It's really a community decision. The community has to buy into this. So I'd like to suggest that we look at this as not, do I agree with it personally or not? It's, what is the best way to get community feedback on this as part of the master plan process. So that's really the objective. All right, enough said there.
As long as if that's the objective, then this committee can't say that we're supporting whatever this is. You're asking the communities. In other words, you can't. See what I'm getting at? You can't say, if this committee doesn't agree with some of the stuff that's going on there, okay, but we want to do it so we can get feedback from the community, you can't have this committee say, we support this.
Right.
You gotta make that clear.
So, no, I'm not asking, at least at this point, I'm not asking the committee to vote on this. What I'm asking, maybe what we would vote on if we do, is that this represents something reasonable to propose, or not propose, but to present to the community for feedback. And hopefully these consultants who get hired, assuming we do approve the warrant article and all that, they do get hired, will be good at figuring out what the community wants to do. And you can't just say, well, do you want to set sustainability goals? I mean, you can't survey people and ask questions like that. You don't get a meaningful answer. So hopefully some of this background will be useful to the consultants to help them figure out how they want to present it to the community. All right. So fair point. And by the way, it's okay to share your personal opinions. I don't want to discourage any from doing that. So here, this is an update. This is what I think is the overall carbon footprint of Carlyle. Overall meaning it still excludes indirect emissions associated with goods and services we purchase, but includes most of the direct emissions. Some of these are, you can argue, are indirect. We'll get to that in a minute. The most important thing, so last month this number was like, I think 36,000 instead of 45,000. I've added agricultural, I've added, updated the residential vehicle stuff. I'll talk about that more in a second. I've added waste incineration. This is sort of interesting. After we had the discussion about paper throw, I said, well, we're sending all our, somebody, Claude had the number for how many pounds of trash we're sending to North Andover.
1.13 tons per household per year.
But we don't burn it. They do.
Yes.
And we send up there, and
should go on there. North Andover's emissions.
Right. So one can argue this particular slice is an indirect emission, but it is something we have control over. So to me, it made sense to throw it in there. And it sort of supports some of the argument about reducing our waste. It's not just about the landfill. It's about the fact that we're burning stuff.
Yeah. And the trucking of it.
And we're trucking it, which this doesn't even include the trucking. I think we include the trucking in the municipal number.
Mm-hmm.
So, in any case, just quickly, the assumptions for this 4% for waste incineration are, well, the Wheelabrator plant in North Andover is supposedly 40 megawatt, but that's obviously a nameplate rating. And they, that's what they claim they're able to produce. Now, I don't know their capacity factor, so I looked up a number, and it's obviously not necessarily a good number. It was only about 45%. But if that number's about right, and it could be, we don't know, then they do generate some electricity. So one could argue, well, maybe we should offset this, by
What, 0.1%?
by something, because they generate electricity. But even if you did offset this 4%, it would only be a 15% offset for the value of the electricity produced, in terms of reducing that number. But the key number in here is, I found one source, and there's variations obviously, but when you burn a pound of trash, you release a pound of CO2.
Yeah.
Basically almost 1 to 1. And, it varies, 0.8 to 1.2, whatever, but it's ballpark. And that's what this number is based on. Again, taking no credit for the electricity, which we can debate whether you should. Agricultural, I'll tell you, it's all over the map. When you look, it's all cattle.
Just based on animals?
It's just,
Okay.
well, essentially it is. I mean,
Right.
I did estimate how much farm soil we till, but that's nothing compared to 140 headed Great Brook. And the numbers for the emissions from a dairy cow, you can get any number you want.
Yeah.
Factor of 10 range in what appear to me to be credible estimates of the number. So this could be 4%, this could be 1%. I have no idea whose numbers are right.
So the main thing though is it's a very small percentage of what.
The key thing here is residential is obviously big, it's 90%. This one you've already, these are all the numbers from the MEI, so we won't go through those, you just threw the chart in. Residential, the chart on the left is just showing, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the fuels we use to heat our homes. And I actually have an independent check on the natural gas number, and it's not way off. I have a contact at National Grid, and I can't cite him, but this I can cite, and it's close enough for our purposes. So hopefully the other numbers are, reasonable. But I found a nice source for estimating our vehicles, residential vehicle emissions. I was kind of really winging it before, and so my numbers have gone up maybe 20 or 25% just on that, based on some work that the Metropolitan Area Planning Council has done. So that's a big change here. And just to keep Bill happy, I added wood into.
Oh, good. And is it an average miles per household on vehicles driven?
Yeah, I'll get to that slide in just 1 second. That'll address that question.
Good.
So
Where does that wood number come from?
Sorry?
How did you get that wood number? Wood?
Well, it's based on, it's a bit of a swag. It's based on the fact that we have some homes presumably that heat with wood. Now, the Census Bureau does not indicate, it just says this is a heating fuel. Many homes have multiple heating fuels.
Exactly.
So who knows if these are 100% wood heated. But in terms of the carbon emissions from wood, that's all over the place. So this is a swag. It's a swag because, we'll get into some other time, but trust me, I've tried to find credible numbers, and again, that's another thing. But our consultants for the Heat Smart program, where we have the wood pellet boilers as part of the program, they pretty much arbitrarily said, let's assume wood is 50% in natural gas. It's just a swag. It won't matter if they're off by a factor or two. That's what it assumes.
By the way, I saw that I installed one that we got installed.
Oh, yeah, the boiler?
Yeah.
Is it a boiler?
It's a boiler. It is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really
So I haven't heard anything from Steve.
Steve,
Yeah. So he's happy with it?
He seems extremely happy with it.
Great.
Yeah. He had to empty the ash once and got 1 shoebox worth of ash out of 3 tons worth of pellets.
Excellent.
3 tons already?
And he bring 3 tons since they put it in at the end of November. So.
Well, I'm not surprised at all, given how much wood we've been burning, just cordwood, so. Wood's heavy. Okay, these are comparisons to 1990 to 2017. Basically same conclusions last time, the numbers have changed slightly, but our emissions in aggregate for residential have gone up 20%, which is roughly what our population has gone up, and so per capita we're about the same. This is the chart that maybe will address your question, Bill. I know this gets a little confusing. The numbers I'm showing on the left here are actually from the UC Berkeley study, which is direct and indirect emissions. And all those pie charts just showed you don't include all those indirect emissions. But this was University of California, Berkeley calculator estimate of our carbon emissions, and Debbie and Jan presented on this a couple of years ago. These numbers are slightly changed, but basically we're about 65% higher total emissions per household compared to the Massachusetts average. And a lot of people are like, I don't believe it. But if you look at the metrics on the right, it kind of makes sense. Home size is 67% greater on average. Household vehicle use, this is a new piece of information from the MAPC surveys done in 2014 and previous years. We drive more. 77 miles per day per household is their estimate, compared to 48 miles per household for Massachusetts. Big difference. And then, of course, we're wealthier on average, and so you might expect we buy more goods and services. So to me, it's not a big surprise. But let me move on. Again, we went over some of this stuff last time, so I want to skip over and get to what's new. Instead of just presenting one slide on sustainability director, let's talk about some different options. Sustainability director is a fairly high-level professional person. Maybe there's I'm making up these titles, but say an energy manager could be a lower-cost professional level. Couldn't expect quite as much out of them. Still something we have to pay for as a town, but might be a little cheaper way to get most of the important things done, but not necessarily all the things the sustainability director could do. So that's conceptually what that means. The next two options here listed are going through some kind of a nonprofit organization. I mentioned Mass Energize because that's a real possibility. That's an organization that's in the process of becoming a 501c3 right now with the help of some Concord volunteer. It's basically, Wayland and Sudbury have set this up, and you can Google them and look at their website if you're interested. But it's kind of sort of a platform for informing, educating, and promoting energy efficiency, renewable energy, and carbon footprint reduction. They have some very small amount of grant money they've gotten, but presumably it's a nonprofit can collect money through ways that we can't. So we could set up our own for Carlyle, dedicated 501(c)(3). There might be some advantages, disadvantages to doing that. And the last option on the list is kind of an all-volunteer option. Let's just get it on the table. Doesn't mean it's free. I'll show that in a second. So those are the options we came up with. These are a swag at some of the resource requirements. This first one I presented last month. The second one is sort of a guess of what a lower cost person might look like. But there's still some engagement by other town staff that I'm counting in here. Frankly, one could argue it should be part of their job anyway to be doing this stuff, but if they're not paying attention to municipal energy use, for example, and not doing some other things that they should be doing. The sustainability director, energy manager, and lead support. So that's a swag. Maybe there's some expenses. That's a number. But I carried through sort of this other staff and expenses number here through this thing, because I think those costs are there no matter how we manage this. I think they are there realistically, whether we count them or not. I'm happy to take suggestions or other views on what these costs might be. I'm not suggesting that, frankly, these are guesses, estimates, but
To clarify, is this for municipal
this is the
only?
whole town.
Whole town.
Or including residential?
Absolutely, that's the
Okay,
idea. Townwide. Now, these are the expenses for tracking, planning, promoting, encouraging, exploring policy options we might want to adopt and all those sorts of things. Obviously, people still have to roll up their sleeves and, reach down in their wallets and pay for the heat pump or the weatherization. I mean, that's obviously not part of this budget. So there's a lot more money needs to get spent by people if we're going to make those sorts of changes. Behavioral changes, if we throw out less trash, maybe that's cheap. If we drive less, that's cheap. If we eat less beef, that's cheap. But if we're going to weatherize, do heat pumps, buy EVs, we've got to spend money. But I did, feedback last month was good and it was appropriate. And basically the question that was asked of us is, hey, what are alternatives here for managing this? And so that was why we put together these slides to try to address those questions. And I tried to want to end on an up note here. Now, obviously, I just explained we haven't talked about the actual cost of these various measures, but when you look what could happen as the upside, if we were to weatherize our homes and just say an average get a 30% improvement in homes, and then put in heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, we could save up to $2.5 million. Now, annually in energy costs. And I haven't even looked at EVs. This assumes that there's no cost savings with natural gas. Just looks at the cost savings of oil or propane.
Well, can you finance it the same way that essentially our grassroots solarized program worked, where the vendor is paying for the option? I mean, the vendor paid our consultant in that case to be selected, after the selection process. We selected vendor or vendors for bulk pricing with the idea of discounts, but they were also paying that person. No reason why that we couldn't do the same thing, and the vendor pays the town, even though they're getting residential benefits. We could get paid in terms of helping to finance something like that.
So you're not talking about sort of the residential solar option where you lease your roof out and you get solar panels?
No. I'm talking about when we did our phase 2 solarized program with John. Who was it?
Yeah, John.
His company. And we selected a PV solar company and a water-based solar company. So we did not pay the consultant. They paid the consultant. We went through a selection process, and then they paid the consultant for each job that they did. I believe they gave a fee.
Right.
There wouldn't be any reason why we couldn't do a similar thing with something like that. If the town resources is helping residents save energy, and we come up with a program which would probably involve some kind of bulk purchasing capability that the vendor could then pay.
So what I'm trying to picture, though, that's in terms of managing one specific measure, like if it were possible for like maybe a heat pump,
for instance. Yeah.
To do that.
You're saving $1 million a year for residents. There's no reason the residents, and it's indirectly paid.
Right.
They can't pay $100,000 up there.
Yeah, they gave us this thing where we could have one heat pump installed. Right? What if they gave us cash, effectively, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, I do this all the time. So it's very common in solar. You essentially pay for leads, or you pay. There's a website called Energy Sage.
Right.
But the vendors pay Energy Sage if they close a job. If they get a contract, they pay Energy Sage for that right to have access to those customers.
Wow. Oh, maybe.
And it's very,
Yeah.
it's not uncommon to have something like that.
Okay.
So it
Wow.
just instead of, you talk about a revenue stream, instead of this being just a cost, you should be able to offset that cost with value by vendors,
Right. I
by
mean, even-
contractors paying for that access,
Right,
essentially.
well, even when I got solar put in, right, whatever, 4 years ago, right, the price of the solar went down the more people we got
Yeah,
in.
exactly.
If you could have split that and said, instead of the price of the solar going down by X, the town is gonna get, half of that, and the resident's gonna get half of that.
Yeah, something like that.
Right, you
Exactly.
could come up with some kind of a
Exactly.
deal on each one of these things that we do that would
I
pump
think
money into some
without
account.
that higher level stuff seems like a non-starter to me. Without something like that there's a great value to the residents, and contractors will pay for that value if there's enough work.
The other question I would have on that.
Because you're basically taking, you're saving them marketing costs. So there's a lot of value in that.
Right, yeah, well, that's, as you point out, that's how the solar program works. It's
Right.
So
kind of how the Heat Smart worked. The idea was you bought down the first cost, as opposed to making a payment.
Right.
Well, on that slide there, where you say weatherized homes, you could save up to 1.2 million, and all the way down, just go all up to 2.5 million. Is that including the cost of doing that work, or is it
No,
just
that's
the
the
savings?
annual savings.
This
Right,
is just
so I
the
mean,
annual savings. It's
I'm
not
looking
a-
at economics here, is if it's gonna cost you 6 million to do all this work, and you're only gonna save 2.5 million, economically, it's not gonna get done. How are you gonna balance that, and how are you gonna get that return that you're talking about, when you split some of it up?
There's
It's a
value
lot-
to the
it's a lot.
comfort of your house too.
Yeah.
Yes,
There,
I
it's a
know.
lot tougher to do the kind of program Bob's talking about with the heat pump, for example, or with weatherization than it is to do with solar.
Yeah, it's clean.
Because there's so many incentives for solar, and solar's a little bit, I hate to say this, I'm not a solar expert, but it seems to be a little bit more cookie cutter, and not necessarily a site engineering project every time. I'm not aware of any situation where what you're describing has been done with heat pumps. It could be wrong. There are now, except for, again, having community programs like Heat Smart. I mean, that's been done
Right.
a lot of places. But even with Heat Smart, I mean, we don't really know how much we bought down the first cost for people. We saw quotes from various sources, and all these different installers have different ways of getting incentives from manufacturers, or there's other state programs like the MVP home program out there.
I mean, the other
You don't
point
know
I would-
you're getting low.
The other point I would
cost.
make is that there's some energy management functions already being included in existing salaries, right? In terms of the facility manager for the school, which is most of the energy of municipal, is essentially the energy manager for the school.
Exactly.
So if you, I don't know how that works.
No, I mean, the assumption in some of the numbers here is that we need more staff time. The assumption is that the things we will be doing if we have goals that we're not doing now, that will
Right.
take money. But in reality, there may be things we're doing poorly now that we could do better, and it might not take any more money.
Right.
So you can argue that.
Anyway.
So that's what I wanted to put in front of you today, and I want to get in the habit of providing at least some update every month to the group, so that you don't just sort of get hit over the head with this stuff, and you have a chance to assimilate it, and again make suggestions and recommendations for you know, what do the selectmen need to know, for example, if anything? I don't even know to what extent they need to be involved. It seems like this master planning process is really the whole community.
Well, we are a work group on them, so somehow, you know, whatever we're suggesting needs to be communicated to them somehow.
Yeah.
You know, because we're not an independent committee.
That's right.
We're
That's right.
a committee under a task force under the selectmen. So.
And the other thing is, in fact, I went back and looked at the November 27 board meeting again. I think that was the date where you talked about the new mission statement. Our new mission statement was adopted then. It didn't. There were some questions that came up that did not end up in the Board of Selectmen minutes, but the Board of Selectmen did ask this. You acknowledge this is a very ambitious mission statement. You know, what resources do you need to even start working on this list, and what can you do with those resources, and what would you do without those resources? So I think this is, in my sense, this is getting at those questions.
Yes, I agree.
And so, to your point, we should present this at some point.
With the idea that we want to bring this as an idea to the master planning committee, that they would get feedback from the town in terms of what the town wants.
Right. We're not presenting this as a recommendation by the task force. We're presenting this as a tool to find out what to help facilitate what the town wants to be. Because I don't know about you, but without this background work, who can even answer whether they're in favor or not in favor of this? You don't even know what it is.
Right.
What are the implications of setting goals?
Right.
And some towns, frankly, I think did set goals. And people voted for them,
They didn't
but
know what they were voting for.
they didn't. Nobody spelled out all the implications.
There's no mechanism to do that. Yeah, we're going to be zero emissions in 5 years.
Right.
And I honestly think, even though I'm sure this is full of errors and stuff will get updated, but what we've done so far to come up with the 45,000 metric tons per year is not way off, and I think it's good enough to give us a sense for where the opportunities lie, what sectors, and where things are coming from. Give us a sense for what we're signing up for. And again, depending on how we want to set goals, if the community does want to set goals, we're talking about somewhere either a 6% reduction per year on average or a 10% reduction per year on average. Some things it's non-linear, like when you buy all your electricity from a renewable source, which I have not factored into this yet, by the way. This is a 2017 number before we did that. But that's like, wow, we paid like a 10th of a cent per kilowatt hour, and we wiped out a huge amount of our footprint. But those kinds of things don't happen all the time, and that price tag may go up over time. People argue with me and say I'm too pessimistic. They say, oh, solar and renewables getting cheaper all the time, blah, blah, blah. I make the other argument. If more and more communities do what we're doing, and states get serious, and maybe even the federal government eventually, the demand for those renewable energy certificates is going to go up, and guess what? They're almost giving them away now in Texas, because they probably can't even sell all the RECs they generate in Texas. But as soon as people show an interest, those RECs are going to start to cost more. So, anyway, I'm sorry.
But the flip side, I mean, there's also, not really shown it, but there's other way. I mean, there are policy things you could do that would have almost no annual cost. Like for instance, if you put a tipping fee on trash of X dollars, well, people probably do a private collection.
Yeah,
well, Paisley Road does.
Or you can go one step further.
Well, that's a
and say
great example.
all new buildings will be zero.
All these are buildings.
It doesn't cost us anything. It costs the new building.
California's requirement, all new houses have to have solar, right?
Well,
Exactly.
we have to be a little careful. There could be hidden costs. When you do those kinds of policy things, you have to say, well, is this, you want to make sure Carlyle still remains an attractive place to live, for one thing. You don't want your property values to go down or anything because the zoning laws are too onerous. But that's a great idea, and if anyone can come up with a concept that would work for existing homes that's analogous, that would be, that's the tough part. But it does involve some cost. It may not be dollars, but you do restrict the freedom of what certain people are going to be able to do.
And I think another thing, I think there's going to be, more and more people on electric cars every year, regardless, right? So how much emissions savings will just come from converting, say, 50% of Carlyle vehicles to electric?
Well, vehicles are roughly 50% of our emissions, and
Well,
if
exactly.
if we get the electricity from renewable sources, then you get rid of half of them, then you got rid of 25% of our emissions.
I'm saying that's got nothing to do with an energy man. That's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, how do we know that? I mean, Claude says the same thing.
It's gonna happen.
It's going to happen.
Same
I think
way
it's
it's
going
gonna
to happen. Whether we have an energy manager or not,
Well, yeah, right.
that's going to have zero effect on whether people buy an electric car, I think.
Right.
Well, this is actually a really key question.
Right.
Is that true? Because if it's
I mean,
true,
it's-
if people are just going to do all this stuff anyway,
Maybe not. I mean, I guess there's an education component, sure.
now it's a new world, right?
It's a new world. It's a fact, though, that a lot of manufacturers
They're not
are
gonna be-
converting to electric.
Right.
And gas vehicle eventually, and I say in 10 years, it's going to be a
You
premium to
could
pay instead of
buy a
electric.
vehicle after
Exactly.
10 years.
So it's just going to be economically. It's just going to go.
Well, this is you're getting this is a very important top level question, which
why
is
spend the money?
why do we need goals? If people can make the argument that all this is going to happen anyway,
Well,
then why do we need goals?
Yeah.
No,
You need
you
something
still
to
need
reach for.
goals, and you still need the education for people to understand how bad it is. I mean, these are great informational. I would have no idea of that, and I'm pretty involved. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think it's tremendous to create the awareness and to show what people can do. And I guess the question is, what are the steps to?
But we can
to
still
go there?
create awareness without setting goals. So I'm being the devil's advocate here. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't generally like the idea of adopting goals. But even I've said many times, it would be immoral and it would be stupid to do it if the community doesn't want to do it.
No, exactly.
And it would be a waste of my time too,
Exactly.
frankly. It'd be a total waste of my time because it wouldn't work. Even if I could do it, I would.
Yeah, I mean, education I think is important. They're like little things, like an EV charging station in town, I think will raise awareness amongst a portion of the population about electric cars in a way that no other thing would, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
you can have lots of stories about electric cars in the media and blah, 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 but they see a charging station at first. It's like, okay, this is concrete. This is here in my town.
Right.
There's a filling station for my electric car,
Yeah.
if I were to buy one. So, but I think a lot of things are constrained by developments in technology, like electric cars, like perovskites. There's all this research being done on that material as either an enhancement to silicon or a replacement for silicon. And when that results in products that people can buy and installers and contractors can buy and install and so on and so forth, then things start to change. But in advance of that, the consumer doesn't really have a lot of impact other than perhaps early adopters who pay a premium to own, renewable
But
technologies.
people have the money to invest in technology, want to see evidence that there's going to be a solid market. And so I think it's a little of each, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
not just waiting for technology to be there to make it easy for all of us, and then we're going to do it anyway because it just makes sense. It's also about showing that there is actually a market for this stuff and people want to do it even if things aren't quite in place.
There's market for it. Other people are doing it in town.
Right.
People Well, this person's reduced their, waste by, they're doing 200.
I'm into 2 tons a year per household of trash. It was an eye-opener. It's like, what do they throw out?
Well, I think
It's everything. If you just buy food, it's just, we're trying, but boy, the packaging,
More packaging than the food.
it kills you.
Packaging than the food. It's going to go more and more. Because people buying stuff online now, everything. Amazon comes up with this little stuff, that much packaging.
Or at least that cardboard you can throw into the
Make some
recycle
money on
part, and that's not counted in that 2 tons, right?
1.13 is just what goes to the incinerator. It doesn't include the dumpster
The
for
2.13,
construction and
right?
demolition. Well,
Yeah.
there's 2,000 tons
Okay.
annually for the entire town, but per household is 1.13 tons per household.
It's 2,000 tons.
It's right around 2,000 tons total
Yeah.
for the town. There's 1,600 households that participate
just wanna make
in the
sure.
transfer station.
Right.
There's 1,777 households according to U.S. Census. According to our town clerk, there's 1,997 households. So there's like a 200-ish household discrepancy.
Shadow household.
Shadow household. Which, and so it's not clear, is it that their records aren't quite kept up to date and they're sending out, because that's the number of census forms they send out,
But
right?
the 2,000 pounds, we know,
10%.
that's what we send, but that's what we send to Wheelabrator
Correct.
every year, right? It's
Correct.
not, it doesn't count the recyclables.
Doesn't count the recyclables.
43 pounds per week per household.
I can't see that.
Well, in any case.
My
but-
back would
But
hurt.
the,
I only go once a
but
month. That's a
but
lot.
it, you know what, it doesn't count the stuff that goes into the,
Construction and
Construction
demolition
dumpster.
dumpster. That goes to a place in
It's garbage bags.
Yeah.
the
Think
former
so?
Fort Devens, and
Per
it's a
week.
green. It's a
You
place
are
that's
asking
considered
about
recycling because they
20
specialize in
pounds,
construction
20
debris, and they have a whole building where they process it. I don't know exactly what
I don't
and
think
they end up doing with
Okay.
it, but it's considered recycling. It's not considered incineration or landfill.
right. But it does include the stuff from the swap shop that they end up pitching, right? Which could-
Correct.
Right.
Some portion of the swap shop goes into the dumpster. Not all of it. If it's
Right.
books or, a mostly metal appliance that goes
Hope
into
they
metal.
recycle it.
So yeah, they sort of recycle the swap shed or
So-
separate the stuff out. But to be fair, some of the trash or recycling that goes to Billerica does end up in trash because
Right.
it's not, their machine isn't perfect. It's not
Right.
like every single little piece is.
And our sorting isn't perfect, and we get.
Yeah, they're like little
contamination,
pieces and stuff like that they just can't deal with. So
Right.
there's some percentage there, maybe 10-20%-ish that goes to landfill, and I'm sure maybe the Fort Devens stuff.
Goes to landfill or goes to?
Well, they call it
incinerator?
recycling, but I don't know what their percentage is. I'm sure they can't recycle everything.
But the stuff that Billerica can't recycle and throws out, do you know where that goes?
I'd imagine to either a landfill or an incinerator, and then
Okay,
to
one or the
landfill.
other, but
Yeah,
yeah, we're not
they don't really
counting.
have any other choice.
All right.
But to follow up on the technology aspect of things, I think there's the early adopters, and then and they. Oh, in terms of the market, right? The question is how people need a signal to invest in a new technology, right? But I think that signal is there because if you can deliver electricity at below current rates, you're going to have a market. People really don't care. They just want the lowest price electricity. If you can deliver transportation, the trajectory for battery prices and so on and so forth is electric cars will be cheaper than gas cars. And so if you can
I've been
invest...
looking into it, and it's got a ways to go, because right now, I'm looking at it personally. I haven't replaced my 2004 car, and I'm thinking, maybe I could go electric. Basically, no savings in terms of gasoline versus electricity with our 21 cents a kilowatt hour.
Mhm.
Almost none. And I paid twice as much for the vehicle as I would if I bought the equivalent vehicle and a gasoline engine. Twice as much.
You're comparing like a
And-
Prius, perhaps.
I'm looking at several of them. I can't remember all of them, but not the Bolt is 38,000, and you maybe buy that down with some of the incentives to get it low to mid 30s or something. But you look at that car, you can buy a gas car that's $16,000, $18,000, $20,000. That's
Same
equivalent.
size. Right, right.
So it's still a lot of money, and then you still have to think about, well, all of us who aren't used to driving the electric vehicles are the charging stations where I need them, and can I figure out, can I change my lifestyle? But just the economics, though, even a tree-hugging green guy like me says, well,
it's
I'm not
still
sure
not
yet. So it's not that simple. And yeah, well, I'm sure it'll get there, but
Right, but I think that's when it's going to, fall over. But the other thing that's happening, I think, is these car manufacturers all see kind of the writing on the wall with electric cars. So nobody wants to be last, right? And left
and
with,
nobody wants to be first either. Unless you're Tesla.
Right. So, but Tesla's forced the issue now, and so the other guys have to plan ahead, and they have to make investments, and then they're going to be looking at limited resources, and they say, well, are we going to come up with the next generation of a combustion engine and all the technology and tooling that we need for that, or are we going to go and invest in battery manufacturing capacity? And once that starts happening, then it's sort of a snowball effect, and then the price will reflect that, because it's really a question of quantity.
But here I come back though. Even if all that is true, it sort of argues against what we're doing here, or does it? And that's what I'm trying to understand. If you're making the argument it's going to happen anyway, why do we bother? And I don't actually believe that personally. I think it does take education. I think we can make it happen a lot faster. And I think it does make a difference when you get the early adopters out there who are willing to buy the product when it's still a little pricey, a little unknown, like you buy the Tesla and you do all this other stuff. Now, that's EVs. Now you talk about the heat pumps. My opinion on the heat pumps is it's not a technology issue. The technology is 100 years old. I mean, that's exaggeration, but even good heat pumps have been used for decades and decades and decades, and millions and millions and millions and millions all over the globe. I mean, Europe and Asia have been using these heat pumps forever. The product is a really good one. The problem that we've known for years and years and years is quality, sizing, selection, and installation, and that got reinforced through HeatSmart. And we're not going to solve that with setting goals necessarily, but it's one of the things we could tackle, and it's a huge job. I can tell you from experience, it's a huge job, because we didn't get to the bottom of it with HeatSmart.
But that seems to me to be the manufacturers and the installers and kind of the whole infrastructure. It's sort of like the private sector, a lot of private sector stuff that needs to kind of get tweaked.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep so.
But so you ran the HeatSmart thing this past summer. How many of the people that got something this summer would have gotten it anyways, do you think?
Good question.
Because I bet you made a big difference there.
No, I'm not suggesting we didn't. We got, we got 1% of Carlyle.
Wow.
Which is not trivial, and it's not, and it raised awareness with a lot of other people who are thinking about it. I'm still getting inquiries about it. I know HeatSmart's over, but what blah blah blah, questions about heat pumps. So and this is the next subject I'll get to in a second. We're going to continue. I'm saying Carlyle, Lincoln, Concord are going to continue to try to promote heat pumps. Let's get the awareness education out there. I'll get to that. I'm going to stop myself. I'm going to ask a question of the group in a second. But again, despite what I said earlier, again, the goal here is to try to figure out a way to facilitate getting input from the community on this subject, and that's what I'm really looking for inputs on. I'll certainly send this deck around with the presentation, with the minutes, and I just would certainly welcome inputs anytime from any of you, and suggestions and ideas, and yes, even your own. I want to know your personal opinions too. I don't mean to What I mean is that let's vote as representatives of the community here in terms of how we proceed here as opposed to what we personally think. But what you personally think matters, because if you think one thing, other people are going to think that too. Enough said on that. Thank you for your...
It seems to me just, I mean, the fundamental different question is, does the town want to have sustainability goals for the town as a whole, including residences,
Right.
and are they willing to put money into achieving
That is the fundamental question.
And it's, the key thing is it's a huge burden on the residents, because that's the pie chart. I mean, it's huge.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
All the work we've done is been municipalities, and it's only
Well, that's
freaking
what I'm saying.
2%.
Well, I'm saying.
I hope nobody feels depressed about
I
that,
know.
but it is sobering.
I mean,
Yeah, we put a lot of work into this.
One way you could do is you could say, okay, we'll have goals, but we won't have you know, any municipal staff or funding or whatever for it. But one thing you could do is, and I did this in Somerville back in the 80s, I was working at Bull Brannick and Newman, and we had an EPA grant to monitor a test house to determine whether soundproofing it was synergistic with insulating it thermally. And this was a house that was under the Tobin Bridge, right in the flight path of Logan, the whole thing, you know, so it was this. And Reagan got elected, canned the EPA program, so I got to take some of the, swag is not quite the right word.
Right.
And one thing was an electric meter that had a remote panel so that you could put it in a living space and show the kilowatt hours as they were, yes, as it was going on, which was kind of advanced technology. So I pulled the old meter out, put this new one in, and ran the wire up. And the idea was to sort of show people, okay, this is what you're using, and motivate them to reduce it. And so in some sense, you know, is there a way to sort of make Carlyle, because when we started
zero energy challenge, or you know, we're just you know, a challenge, you know, you can do.
Yeah, if we could
more
show
things
people, here's like yesterday we used this many kilowatt hours, and last year on this day we used this many kilowatt hours, or last year when it was 30 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny, we used this, you know, so that people could have a feeling like, okay, you know, we're making progress, or, you know, because people do want, that when they hear that households on average are 1.13 tons of trash per year, they're like, oh, that's not good, you know, we're fifth.
And where am I though? Where am I in relation to? I mean,
Yeah.
they have mechanisms that help them.
But here's the thing. So.
And actually, the
But
gas company does this with a little
people
letter.
need to do all this, and they're either going to be people who are volunteers or they're going to be people who are paid. And this is a question. You know, there's tons of work done in this community by volunteers. Very important work done all the time. You guys know about it.
Yeah.
But what really characterizes what should be done by paid staff versus what should be done by volunteers? How do you decide? Or isn't there any way to decide? If you can get a volunteer, you do. If you can't, you pay somebody. Is that how it's decided?
I mean, in this town, it seems like everything is done by volunteers except those things which are somehow like state mandated.
Yeah, you need a license for it or
Right,
something.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Well, there's people in this building who are doing things. So.
but they're all like, I don't think you can have a volunteer building inspector. I don't think you can.
No.
Whatever you need a license, you know.
Well, I don't know
If you're
that.
licensed, then volunteers, you know.
I don't think you necessarily would get one, or if you did, they might not do a very good job, right?
Well, we kind of have one. Well, I mean, the building inspector is
Yeah,
completely
you're a
funded by
licensed
its permit
inspector.
fees.
But it's paid. It's a paid.
It's a paid position.
It's a paid
Paid,
position,
it's gotta
be a
but it
paid
doesn't cost the
town anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I have an opinion, personal opinion on it, but it's just mine. My personal opinion is if the community really doesn't want to invest any money into this, or figure out a way to get money to do this, it's probably best not to set goals, and probably best just to promote energy efficiency and renewables to people who want to do it.
I don't think it's that way.
I think you think to set goals. I think that's important to set
It
goals.
is, because
But is it disingenuous to set the goals and not put something in place to ensure you actually have a chance?
no,
of meeting
well,
it?
because you got different priorities in the town. Like I was trying to talk to Jen about it. I mean, when you add up all the things that are necessary to keep the town going in an efficient manner or whatever, this may be a lower priority because, hey, you know, this building's not gonna have heat in the next 3 years because the air handler's gonna be gone, you know, and it needs to be replaced. That's $100,000. That's the $100,000 that we were gonna spend on this, you know, for an energy manager or you know, so you gotta look at it. So I think you should set the goals and let it go, but I mean, you gotta understand that it depends on the year and the funding year.
But there also could be a continuum of, you know, you're talking about a full-time position. There could be a continuum while you start out with the part-time position.
Right, like we're doing the facility manager right now.
And accomplish these portions of the goal.
I mean, it's not that we don't want the goals. It's not that we don't want to do all of this. It's just that we're in priorities and time now needs to be done. But I think
I think the goals are important. I think you need them to accomplish the change, but there may be like a continuum of other ways to do it. Just that's a portion of volunteer, a portion of maybe it's another group that are people enthusiastic about. You know, there's a lot of people in town who are very into sustainability in different areas, and may. If it's on the energy, maybe the energy task force is maybe not the right group to take it. It maybe should be a standalone new group
sustainable energy
that wants to drive this. And there's a lot of people to church.
There used to be such a group.
Yeah.
I forgot what it was called.
Yeah, it was completely outside of the energy task
It's a
force.
separate group, and they put together some type of a sustainability plan, and it kind of fell apart many years ago.
Yeah, I think that was Green Communities. There was a web page that was set up too, which we inherited.
It's like Carlyle Climate Action or
Yeah.
something. I don't remember the name.
Something similar to that.
In any case,
Like I mean, one thing I mean, if you do scorecarding, just the measuring yourself versus your neighbor, like they do this for
Competitive, yeah. On the
Natural
power.
gas does it.
On power.
Natural gas. So
National Grid does.
National Grid. So you know what you do versus
Your
your
neighbor.
neighbor or your
How much
neighbor.
you
So
used.
you could do a carbon tax in town. I mean, you could do a bunch of things.
could we do a carbon tax? Is that legally? Could we?
I don't know.
That's one of the
How would you measure it?
But that's a tax. That's still people paying for it.
But maybe it goes to the people. It's not a tax. It's a redistribution.
There you go.
Well, I wonder if municipalities have the ability to add something to people's, you know, a natural gas bill or electric bill. You know, like a municipal surcharge.
State certainly has
Well,
that.
We have
No,
the
it's on the
ability.
cable bill, right?
Yeah.
There's
Right.
some local cable access things.
Well,
You certainly have the ability
The
there.
Board of Selectmen can add a fee or whatever it's called to under the community aggregation program. We can add something to our electric bill.
Right. Well, there
I
you
think
go.
it's rare for communities
But
to
that's
do
a
that.
form of taxation, guys.
Well, wait a minute though. What Bob was suggesting is, yes, it's taxation, but it's not an increase in taxes. It's a redistribution. So that's different people. It's still collecting the same amount, but distributing the burden in such a way that it incentivizes people to do the things we're trying to promote.
Yeah, I'm not saying.
I think that's-
I'm just saying there's.
Well, yeah. So
Like
the
a
revenue
rocket.
neutral. You reduce property taxes by X, and then you don't buy any electricity.
Right.
So you'd be like, hey, crank up that per kilowatt charge, and then reduce my property taxes as much as possible.
All right. I want to close on that. I'm concerned about the time. I just want to switch gears. And oh, by the way, the other thing, if you know of anyone who's interested in this, we could use some help. I'd love to have somebody review some of the numbers and whatnot. It's really been Debbie and me, and I've been doing all the number crunching. So last thing, update on Heat Smart transition. You'd be surprised how difficult it is to give away a free heat pump.
You're kidding. Nobody?
No, well, we had 4 people apply. We did the kind of pull names out of a hat thing. 4 people applied. First person we selected had like a 1725 farmhouse, and he didn't want to hang an indoor unit on the wall, and the ceiling unit was going to cost him an extra $1,500, and he didn't have the money, and so we had to select the second person. So hopefully that will go through. And the only thing I wanted to mention, I said this a bit earlier, but so Concord, Carlyle, and Lincoln are continuing to meet every 2 weeks, and we're being fairly quiet because we're not doing anything public yet. But we did, by the way, we were able to use up the remaining Heat Smart funds to create a couple of videos that, you know, we'll see how helpful they are to people, but we are trying to figure out some kind of a platform for providing information and about heat pumps, and we are including heat pump water heaters with this. And Concord is conceptually going to do that, but they're sort of figuring out how to do that. At least for now, we can link to their information. One of the things that Concord ran into, and I don't know whether we'd run into this or not, but Concord's management is very concerned about anything that's sort of a town-supported program that involves coaches or ambassadors, because there's liability concerns, and their insurance companies advise them not to do it. And they had somewhat analogous situation where they had a great idea one year to hook up volunteer teenagers to help shovel snow for elderly people and whatnot, and turns out apparently one kid robbed a couple in their home, and you know, so there is a potential liability for the town, and potential risk, I suppose, to coaches or coachees alike. So Concord is not, they haven't got a final answer, but it's not looking good for them to be able to do that kind of thing.
Set up a separate group outside of the town, a volunteer group, and do it.
It would have to be a group that, you know, again, like a nonprofit group or some other group that has no town affiliation, but the town doesn't mind, you know, having a link to that website or something. So I don't know whether we'd run into those issues here in Carlyle or not.
When something happens, you run into it.
Yeah, you do. It only takes one.
Yeah.
But when we did the last solar program, that was not a state-sponsored program. That was our own, and Claude was the coach.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be in direct violation of the advice that Concord's getting, right?
Well, yeah, but I don't want to set, you know, Concord is Concord, and they have their reasons for deciding things. I don't know that they necessarily apply here or not. I'm asking the question. I'm sure none of us have the answer, but
yeah, I mean, I was very careful to say, well, you know, I don't actually know. You know, I did have my solar panels installed, one of the two sets, by this particular vendor, but that was so many years ago. I don't know necessarily. This is an industry that's evolving and changing, you know. So I try to qualify every. You know, I told them, look, you don't necessarily have to go with this vendor either. You know,
right?
Make sure, you know,
3 bids.
Yeah, get other bids. So, and I certainly didn't give any advice about, you know, structural reinforcement or
yeah. Well,
you know,
that aside, you know, for thinking about heat pumps, because that's the thing I'm familiar with. You know, it's fine to tell people about heat pumps and point them to people, but if there isn't some way to help people through that process of finding an installer that they can trust,
You're right.
We're missing a huge piece, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
But I think it's really hard because, you know, even if you quote unquote vet an installer, you'll always find somebody who's going to complain that installer did a poor job, right? Even if 90% or 95% of the people say, "Oh yeah, they were great."
Variation on the day and the construction and human
personality differences, and you know, I don't know, different, you know, that day. Who knows? I can tell you, in Carlyle, we have at least 2 people, maybe more, hope not. We have at least 2 people who are profoundly unhappy with their heat pumps.
Who were part of the Heat Smart program?
Just why? Because of operation or just the installation?
One was, well, there are a lot of people had complaints about process and communications and schedules and stuff. I'm not even counting that stuff. But one was an aesthetic issue. They were horrified, and the heat pump installation never got finalized, and the second one is a performance issue. And so there is potential for concern in the town, but I don't know. Nobody's come back and held the, chewed out Heat Smart team. People have been very gracious. I've been in touch with the people involved. They're understanding. We didn't.
They can be complex sometimes.
But, so
my
you can imagine
engineer
someone
works for me. He's put in 2 heat pumps, and it's been 6 months, and one of them still does not work correctly from a thermostat. They had to pull out this Nest thermostat, put in another thermostat. It never stages his radiant heat amp correctly, and he's a technical guy, and he can't get the contractor to make this heat pump work.
So those are the practical issues that make it tough to do things like this, even if people are willing.
Right.
But I don't, again, there's a lot of people who are very happy too. All right. I think that's enough for today. I didn't do as badly as last month. Maybe I can do better.
Wow.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
I need a
Second.
All in favor?
Okay, we're adjourned at 9:27. Let's get that number right.
Okay.
We down.
And we can stop streaming now.
Good.
We're not saving that, are we?
It's saved forever.
It's
on the internet already.
It's on the internet. It will forever.
I'm going to be quiet.
Did anybody check the heat pump temperature was saturated and the superheat was right and all this other crap? I mean, it's usually just a tragic.